Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to Joe Barbieri here at the library. This library means a lot to me and my brother Ray with us tonight, and we'll explain all that in just a minute. I have a PowerPoint here that we're going to have to race through because I'm a quantity over quality kind of guy. So we have lots of slides to get through and stories to tell about what New City has done to me. And my obsessions about creating stories and how it all evolved. Uh-oh. Did I forget to do something? Okay, we can go home now, so. There we go. Okay, usually I start off this meetings like this by saying, hi, my name is Frank and I'm a recovering filmmaker. That's your cue to say, hi, Frank.
Hi, Frank.
Thanks. Okay, this is our family at the Dutch Reformed Church in Spring Valley around 1950. Easter, my mother made those suits for us. That's my older sister, Bonnie. She was a child prodigy. And part of what inspires me about this city is the music, which we'll get into in just a minute. One of my favorite authors, John Fowles, says the genesis of all art is the pursuit of the irrecoverable. It's arguable about whether or not what I write is art. Let's just say the genesis of my writing is the pursuit of the irrecoverable. And by irrecoverable, I mean what we had growing up here in New City in the 40s and 50s and the early 60s. Our parents had grown up in the Depression, they'd gone through the war, they came back, had baby boomer kids, and they were determined that we would not have to face the hardships that they faced. And they made sure that they worked extra hard to make sure that we had a special life in this special little town. So as we go through this, what's going to happen is I'm going to be talking a lot about New City, but I'm also going to be talking a lot about my obsessions about New City. And one of the questions that is always raised is, in my mind anyway, do other people feel as obsessed about their childhood towns as I do about my childhood town? The answer is, I don't know. Maybe you can help me determine that. We got an open discussion later on. Do you all feel this way about your hometown, or is this just some order type personality that I have, where I've saved everything I've ever owned that has to do with this city, and all the memories and the great times and the French that we had? Okay, so let's start out by saying, here's what we're going to talk about: the beauty of our New City environment, my New City family history, my family of readers and musicians. We come, with Brother Ray and I come from a family of readers and musicians. Our New City exploration, we spent our childhood not playing video games, but wandering around in the woods and wading in the streams and the fields and the ponds. My New City experiences, New City schools, we're going to get into that, my New City memories, and New City music. And to talk about New City music, one of my latest books about New City, Jimmy Van Meter's Last Refrain, I want to read from the dedication. To my beloved older sister, Bonnie Eberling, who started taking piano lessons at the age of 5 around the same time I was born, and filled the house of my life every day with her beautiful classical piano music. Imagine growing up, listening to Liszt, Chopin, Von Suppé, Beethoven, Grieg, Bach, played live in your home all day long. What would you do to your imagination? Bonnie, as I write the words to this book, I am hearing the music of your playing as it echoes down the hardwood floors in the hallway of our tiny house our parents and grandparents built. To where I sat, listen, other kids were listening to pop hits on the radio. I was listening to Malinguenia, Grieg's piano concerto, The Poet and the Peasant, and Hungarian Rhapsody played on the piano down the hall. My beloved younger brother Ray, who also played piano, guitar, trombone, bass too. To my beloved parents, Lydia and Frank, who played piano, organ, saxophone, zither, ocarina, and to help make our childhood a musical one. You know that song you can never get out of your head? Think hundreds. They are always there, better than a tape, better than a CD, better than YouTube, Pandora, or iTunes, and it lasts a lifetime, all again. So this story has a musical soundtrack to it, provided by my family, especially my older sister. So Bonnie, thank you for that. By the way, that's down in the Dutch Gardens, about 1950. Okay, so where is New City? Well, it's up the Hudson. Let me read you another quick bit from Lotor, another novel I wrote about New City, up the Hudson. If you were to fly a helicopter north about 30 miles up the Hudson River from Manhattan on a glorious autumn day, just south, I'm supposed to say camera, sorry. Just south of the old brick town known as Haverstraw, you could begin your wide sweep to the west and head over the crest of High Tor. As you flew over the rocky cliff, you looked over your left shoulder to the southeast. You could see Trap Rock, a large quarry owned by a company that had dynamited away the west side of the mountain, gouging half of it away from the gravel that paved the streets and reinforced the concrete of a rapidly growing New York City. To the westward, High Tor is a lower ridgeline known as Low Tor. The streams below flow north to South Mountain Road just underneath you, before arcing south to feed into the reservoir. One creek contains the remains of the stone towers of the old Dells Bridge that led to what we call Delwood Country Club. Within the bowl of that arcing mountain range, down in the valley below, lies the hamlet of New City. New City is filled with magnificent trails and vistas, no doubt about it, but much of its beauty was not appreciated by the early European settlers. Sailing up the Hudson, they had easier access to the interior on the east bank of the river. The gentle rolling hills toward the rising sun were more inviting than what they found on the west side. Looking up from the river to the west bank, they saw the steep cliffs of the Upper Palisades, almost like a staircase on its side, seemingly inaccessible. But for those who made the effort, on the western face of that imposing ridgeline of rocky ledges, there was a landscape enveloped by breathtaking hills and valleys and crisscrossed with streams that could be dammed up to power their mill wheels. All these uneven landscapes made the area almost inhospitable, difficult to travel, difficult to farm, and the inaccessibility made it late to develop as eventually did. The original beauty of New City Valley could still be found in the undeveloped areas if you know where to look. So that's where New City is, up the Hudson. By the way, that picture on top of High Tor and Low Tor, thanks to my friend Karen and Jim Damiani, they took that photograph for me. You got a photo credit in the book, but no money. Okay, so a little bit about our family history. Our great-great-grandfather, Henry Eberling, came over from Darmstadt with his bride, Barbara. That was not when they were married. But they came in through Baltimore Harbor or New York Harbor, we're not sure. Ray's trying to do some research. They came here because they were hired by a guy named General Blenker, who was a German general, and then he came over here and he was a Civil War general, and he had a horse farm up in New City Park, kind of adjacent to the cemetery there on the end of Collier Avenue. And he hired Henry Eberling I around 1857 to come up and run his horse farm, and they did for a couple of years before they had enough money to buy their own farm on top of New Hempstead Hill, on top of the S-curve, kind of across from the jail. So there's Henry and Barbara and their 11 children. Now you know why there was an Eberling dynasty for so many generations. They had 11 kids. I showed this to someone recently, and I said they had 11 kids, and the response was, didn't they have cable TV then? Okay, so what I like to do to kind of pass this on to the next generation, this is my son, Frank Henry Eberling IV, Esquire. I take him to Eberling Drive. I've taken there. I have a whole bunch of pictures of him standing next to that. So he knows that that hill to the northwest was owned by the Eberling family farmers for many, many generations. And I also take him to German Cemetery, where several dozen of the Eberling family is now buried, including his grandparents and his great-grandparents. So I like to pass this on because I want him to feel my obsession for growing up in New City. My grandfather, Frank Eberling the first, he married Elsa Bartels. Again, this was not when they first met. They first met around 1900. She was up visiting from Queens, I think, and they met in a dance in the basement of the New City Courthouse. That's the Rockland County Courthouse, the second edition. And they met in a dance in the basement, fell in love, and got married a couple of years later. And that's her in New City, probably in the 40s, and that's with Ray, who had just gotten his wings in the Air Force back in the mid-70s. There's my grandfather. Whoops. He had a mailroute from about 1904 to 1917 in that mail wagon, and then he went out and bought a Pontiac, because that's what everyone was doing. If you look carefully at that picture, you can see the old courthouse way off in the background down there, and that's Frank number one, and that little boy down there is Norm Baker, whose granddaughter is here with us tonight. This picture here, we can determine, was taken around 1904, 1905, something like that. So anyway, we have all this family history here, and all of this building to what has become a lifelong obsession for me. My parents were storytellers and musicians. They got married in the late 30s. That is back in the 70s, down in Florida, where we eventually moved. But they were always telling stories. My father read a couple books, novels a week. My mother read like 5 newspapers a day. And so they're always relating stories to us. This is our home on 147 South Main Street. It's opposite St. Augustine's Church. Now it's a little cottage for what, a cleaning service or something?
It's an office for a construction company.
This house was built by my grandfather and father before the war because my parents had gotten married. They knew they wanted a family, so they hand-built this house themselves, my father and grandfather, right there, and it's still standing today. All the bushes are gone, and now it's a parking lot, but that's the house that they built for us to grow up in, and it was a tiny home, but it was a wonderful home, a marvelous place to grow up. This is where the story gets a little bit more serious. When I was about 7 years old, I had what's known as a 7-year-old temper tantrum, and I picked up the hammer that my grandfather and father had used to build the house during this temper tantrum, and I started pounding the door in the back hallway. And I pounded the door 6 times. And my mother came running down the hall, and she was devastated, heartbroken, because during my temper tantrum, I had destroyed this beautiful handcrafted door that my father and grandfather had built. So she hardly knew how to tell my father when he got home from work, because she knew what it would do to him. But she had to tell him. And I'm standing there watching, knowing, uh-oh, what's going to happen to me now? I see a spanking in my future, even though spanking was not in our family tradition. But what's going to happen to me? So the deal was, I was having to go to bed at 7 o'clock every night for 2 weeks. At the beginning of summer vacation, while all my friends were out playing baseball and running around in the woods and the streams and the brooks, I had to go to bed at 7 o'clock. So the first night, my father very solemnly, very emotionally walks me upstairs, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought for sure I was going to get a spanking or a stern lecture. But in the next 3 minutes, my life would change forever. He tucked me in, he walked over to the eaves and opened the eaves door, got down on his hands and knees and crawled into the eaves. We came out carrying a box about this size. And the contents of that box changed my life forever. I know that sounds like a hyperbole, but it's true. It changed my life forever. What was inside the box? A series of boys' novels that had been written in the early 20s that he had read 30 years earlier when he was 7 and 8 years old, that had been given to him. It was the Jerry Todd series. Jerry Todd and the Whispering Mummy, Jerry Todd and the Rose-Colored Cat. There are about 10 Jerry Todd books in the series. And it's about a group of young kids, all about 10, 12 years old, who go out and solve mysteries out in this really tiny imaginary town in Illinois called Tutter. And my father sat down and he picked up, for some reason, he didn't start with the first one, he started with a rose-colored cat. Whoops. And he started reading. And I watched his face as he started reading. And something came over him that I will never forget. He was brought back to the 1920s in Middle America, where a group of these young boys went out and solved mysteries as part of their daily and nightly routine. As he read, I was overcome with emotion. I saw what it was doing to him. I saw how it brought back memories and brought back these visions that he had had. The difference is, even though this happened in Illinois, I envisioned everything in those books to take place in New City. Not Tutter, Illinois, but New City, New York. So when they're going to the all-night diner, or they're solving a mystery, or somebody's up to shenanigans, or they're getting into a fight with the other guys in town, I'm envisioning New City. And he sat there, and he read me this book, and when it was over, he went on to the other ones, and then the other ones, and the other ones. And so the fact that I was being put to bed every night at 7 o'clock while my friends were outside playing, I didn't care about that anymore. I wanted to sit there in bed and listen to him read to me these stories that were so emotionally gripping for him. And it was during that 3 minutes, when he first read that first book to me, that I decided that I was going to be a writer. And I was going to tell stories that were as captivating about New City as Leo Edwards had done for Tutter, Illinois, an imaginary town. A couple of interesting sidebars here. The guy who illustrated all of his books, and there are about 5 or 6 pictures like that, and they're all kind of goofy, silly-looking things like that. The guy who illustrated them is a guy named Bert Sal, who, by coincidence, lived in Congress. So where did he get the idea? He didn't live in Illinois, he lived in Congress, so that's really Congress, as far as I'm concerned. And those stories that took place in New City. So there are about 10 or 12 of these Jerry Todd books, and he read them all to me. And then they brought in a new friend, Poppy Ott, and Poppy Ott had about a dozen or so books, and he read those to me as well. And when he was all finished reading them, I started reading them all by myself. And as a result of his kindness instead of punishment, I became a lifelong voracious reader, because he shared with me something that meant so much to him emotionally as a young child himself. They were the centerpiece of his young life. So we had Jerry Todd and Poppy Ott. They even had, you could join the Freckled Goldfish Club. And a couple of years ago, Ray sent off these membership cards. Got one for my father before he passed away and one for me. They're just kind of goofy membership cards where you can sign up and join the club. So anyway, I became enthralled by these books and enthralled by reading. And I became a lifelong voracious reader. He led me to the Penrod series, which takes also place in Middle America. He introduced me to the Tarzan series that he had. I read all the Hardy Boys series, which takes place in Bayport, Long Island. But as far as I was concerned, everything was taking place in New City. I didn't care about Bayport. I didn't care about London or the jungles of Africa or Middle America where Penrod grew up. I think it was Pennsylvania. I can't remember. Anyone read Penrod? I think it was. Anyway, it was all New City. And I vowed to myself, I am going to write books about New City that are going to be as memorable as what these authors had done for my young brain. And my father's a generation earlier. Not too long before that, when we were in kindergarten, the New City Library, which had been established a few years earlier and was a New City Grammar School for a while, they wanted to build a library building standalone. So what they did is they took these receipts and sold cinder blocks for 25 cents each, 50 cents to buy 2 cinder blocks, and you could paint your initials on them. And that's how they raised money to build the library at the corner of Maple and Demorest, just south of the fire station. So my mother brought a couple for me, a couple for Ray, a couple for Bonnie, and you could paint your initials on there. Those are the initials that were going to go on there. And here's some of the Masons who volunteered their time to help build this library. My grandmother was part of this committee. She at one time had library card number 1. And she was also a voracious reader. She was reading like 7 novels a week. She would go through like 7 Agatha Christie's or Niall Marsh or some of those old British mysteries. She was constantly reading. And so that's the environment that we grew up in. That's the environment that showed us the pleasure and the joy that can come from reading. And there's the library. And we have about a half dozen of these pictures that my mother took. And on some of them, you can actually see FHE for me or RAE for Ray. But that, again, was a little tiny building on the corner of Maple and Demorest. And I don't know when they tore it down because I've been out of town for a while. But that's what it looked like. We spent many hours there. We had to walk past it on the way to school and the way back from school. So many afternoons on the way back from school, I would stop in and check out some books or whatever. So it was like a home away from home. Thanks to your predecessors, Joe. Okay. Back around 57, I was about 12 years old, 11, 12 years old. My aunt, my father's sister, was asked to give a presentation, something like this, for the Historical Society about New City history. And so she asked my father to walk around town and take pictures of New City, showing the old buildings. And after a while, what happened was he invited Ray and me to go on that trip with him. And here's something I wrote about it several years later. When I was 12 years old, my father was asked to take a photo essay of my hometown to support a lecture his older sister was giving to the local historical society. On a late winter day in December 57 or January 58, he gathered up his 35mm camera and a few rolls of slide film and asked my brother and me if we wanted to accompany him as we walked around town to take pictures of sites of historical interest. I wasn't particularly interested in photography or history in general or history of my hometown, but I tagged along for some reason, perhaps just to be in his company for a brief time. In the next 8 hours, again, my life would change completely. We set off walking the streets where I grew up. They were the same streets where he had grown up. His father and his grandfather as well had grown up on those streets. It was a town where my great-great-grandfather settled in 1857 with his bride. My father and Ray and I spent the day walking the streets where they had all walked before me, hiked the woods near the farm where the first Eberlings had homesteaded, waded in the stream where my namesakes had helped set muskrat traps and fished as boys. As we walked, he told us the family of the town's history. It was probably the most intense and thorough conversation I ever had with my father in my lifetime. As he took the pictures, he spoke of family lore and the buildings that had once filled our town, the forgotten fairground where horses had raced, and the series of tiered mill ponds that powered the grist mills, that now survived only as indentations in the woods behind the earthen dams that had crumbled and were overtaken by underbrush. Long disappeared, the pond beds were visible, even obvious to those who knew what to look for. For years prior to our day together, I had hiked these woods daily, never realizing the significance of the ground where I walked with him that day. It was as if his words had revealed a new world to me, and his stories gave me a newfound respect for not only the woods, but his obvious love for them. By sharing his woods with me, I don't think he realized the power of what he was doing, or the long-term impact that day would have on my life. When my parents moved my family to Florida after I graduated from high school, many of the relics of my family's past were lost. For years, I wondered what happened to those 50 pictures we had taken that day. Several years ago, some 60 years after they were taken, I found them stored in a box in a place I never would have expected. Although the Kodachrome had faded and some were spotted with traces of mildew, they had somehow survived. When I looked at them, I was taken back to that day I spent with my father and realized what a significant event that was. Since that time, I have produced literally hundreds of historical documentaries, mostly in Florida. With each and every shot, even though I was nowhere near home, I have retraced my father's footsteps and speared from that place so far away and so long ago. Every time I shoot, I relive that day with my father. And so when I took my son on that journey through my father's woods in the summer of 2007, it was a desperate attempt on my part to establish a bond with him, to provide him with some historical and familial context so he could feel as if he were part of something larger, the results of the work of others who had gone on before him and who had provided him with a legacy that no one could take from him. I wanted him to have an identity. When I was up there in 2013 by myself, I walked the woods every day searching for something I may never find, some trigger that will spark a memory of those long ago conversations my father had with me, a memory of some imagery or sound or feel that would provide me with peace. That scent of autumn leaves. I'll read some more of that. Excuse me. So we started out taking old pictures. Family history. This is a shoe factory that was down at the bottom of New Hempstead Road, kind of where the new courthouse is, or the courthouse Anniston is now. There were two family shoe factories owned by the Eberling family, second generation. That's the exterior of one of them. And here's some, sorry about the quality of these pictures, but they're 120 years old or whatever. Notice all the child labor going on here. But we started out taking those pictures, and then if you remember the post office that was kind of downtown on the west side of Main Street, there was an old mansion next to it. It's the Salom Mansion. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Salom Mansion. That's where the owners of the Eberling shoe factories lived, in that house that was eventually torn down. Okay, so we started our walk. He was going to tell a picture history of New City with Ray and I following in his footsteps. So we started out in the front yard. That's our front yard. That's St. Augustine's across the street there. That was what our front yard looked like. We had a big, beautiful hedge there. It had once looked like that back around 1904. This was my grandmother's house right here. And that's like directly across from 3rd Street. There's a big office building here now. And this building where my father was born on the kitchen table, that was an ice cream parlor for a number of years. And then it became a drug house or something, I don't know. And what was there now? Dom's. Okay, that's the building right there. My father was born on the kitchen table in there. Okay, there's St. Augustine's, St. Augustine's. Notice what they're doing there. They're putting in the confessional booths. You remember when that happened? Those are the confessional booths. Whoops. Get a little ahead of myself here. Whoops. Okay, so they were putting the confessional booths there. So that kind of dates it, January 58, we think. And they, of course, torn that down. That was a Forester's Hall before it was the Catholic Church. And that's where they used to show silent films in New City back in the 20s. The original St. Augustine's Church was in this building, which became a veterinarian's office for many, many years. Dr. Goebbels for many, many years. And I think it's still a veterinary office. Okay, if you walk south on Main Street across from our house, this is the old Schriever mansion that had burned down. I don't know if you remember these. Are you guys from New City? You remember these ruins? They were across the street from Schriever Lane. There's a strip mall there, parking strip mall there now. But that's what it looked like. Yeah. I had pictures of what it looked like before it burned down. Okay, this is the Little League field. That's St. John's Episcopal Church. At one time, my grandfather owned all that whole property there before it was turned into a Little League field. Off in the background, you can see High Tor and Low Tor. And these are the things that we grew up loving. And going here with my father and hearing these stories, we became obsessed with family history and New City history. There's the old Rexall Mike's, great chocolate chip and ice cream there. Rex's Barbershop, haircuts. There's Steinman's. Hey, there's Uncle Jack. That's our uncle. Just happened to be there when we were taking pictures. This is Maple Avenue. This picture was not taken the day that my father was taking us on the photojournal. This is back in the early 1900s. There's a Methodist church where he had gone to church as a little boy, and I had gone to kindergarten in like 1950 or 51. This was before you came along, right, Dick?
Yeah, I was 56.
Okay, we're going to come back to this picture in a little while. There's downtown. If you look to the left there, you see the mailbox. That's where the old post office was. That was actually the third New City post office. And across the street over here on that side of the road was Dr. Cohen's office, the local town doctor. And looking north toward Congress Road and New Hempstead Road.
I got to correct myself. 53, I moved in.
Second grade. I think it was second grade.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, here's the old Elms Hotel. Over here, you see would become the Fajan building and Kinky's grocery store. Obviously, this was not taken on the day of our walk, but just as a reference. And if you read Demarest Kill, you notice there's a sub-theme in there about someone burning down buildings in the story. There's an arson in town, and no one knows who it is. And over the course of the story of Demarest Kill, you see all these buildings, these historical buildings in New City being burned down, the Elms being one of them. This is the courthouse, the newer courthouse. And this was not taken by my father. The one taken by my father was too faded, so I used that one. This is what the original, this was the second courthouse where my grandparents had met. This is the old Vanderbilt's Lumberyard, which prior to that had been the Erie Railroad Station, where the train would come, and my father, who went to NYU University after graduating from Congress High School, he would go there every day and take the train from New City to Nanuet. And there was a young woman who was on the train from Spring Valley to Nanuet who was going down to work at Lord and Taylor's. They met, they fell in love, our parents. So this train station has deep significance for us because that's where they met and fell in love. This is where I went to grammar school. My father went to grammar school there. My sister went to grammar school there. My grandfather went to grammar school there. And we loved that building. And it burned down.
Right next to the
It's on Old Schoolhouse Road. Old Schoolhouse Road. And we used to stand online there every morning, wait for the bell to ring, and then go inside. Dickie, you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, boys on that side, girls on that side. Okay, here's a picture from the inside of that grammar school in the late 1800s. My grandfather is in there somewhere, but I don't know which one it is. Too blurry. This is the new school they built for us in New City Elementary. And we were just about to start that in that late 50 year. After Christmas break, we went to the new school instead of the old school. Okay, on this walking tour, my father had me posed by the old spring head down there in the Dutch Gardens, which is now a parking lot. I don't know how many of you remember this old spring head. We used to go there and get watercress and eat raw watercress right out of the water. And the water was drinkable, ice cold. There was a baseball field next to it. All the players would come over there and get their drinks. So this is the old spring head. And of course, my father had played there as a kid, and my grandfather had played there as a kid. There's Greenberg's Pond Dam, spillway, which Jim and Karen and I went over there a few weeks ago, and they were tearing it all down. I don't know what they're doing with it, but they tore down everything. I made it a point to go to Greenberg's as a pilgrimage every time I came to New City, because I had spent so much time there being chased off the property by the guard with the German Shepherd and the shotgun. Jim, the guard, would walk around literally with a shotgun in his hand and a big German Shepherd. He would turn loose on you if you were skating there or fishing for perch or whatever we fished for. But I would make it a pilgrimage to go back there because this place meant so much to me, even though I was living in Florida at this time. I think Karen and Jim took that picture, didn't they? Over there on one of our visits. So I guess it's all gone now. I don't know what they're going to do with it. Anyone know what they're doing with it?
This is across, the jail, right?
Yeah.
They're fixing the dam, I believe. It's still going to be a pond.
Okay, good.
That was happening?
I took my son there. If you know what to look for, you can see north of the Greenberg spillway, you can see a series of smaller dams and spillways, and each one of them was used to turn a mill wheel. You can't see them anymore unless you know what to look for. He's actually sitting on one of the dam walls when I took my son there. We went to the Dutch Gardens. This is not my father's picture. This is the Dutch Gardens back in the 40s when it was filled and it had not been vandalized by some of the local kids. Some people say Dutch Gardens, other people say Dutch Gardens. There were supposed to be 3 of them, but they only built 1, so I'll let you decide. Here it was on that day in '58. See the snow still on the ground, facing south toward the brick wall, which has been all torn down now and replaced. It just so happens when we were there taking pictures that day, 2 of my classmates were there just kind of hanging around and playing. Anyone recognize Gladys Williams or Barbara Fishberg? They just happened to be there. And I took my son at the south end of the Dutch Gardens is the place where the murder takes place in Demarest Kill. So I wanted him to see these landmarks so when he read the book, he would have some historical context. So the young woman, Beth, who's the central figure in Demarest Kill, she's murdered there. She's murdered there, and then the murderer pushes her down the hill into the Demarest Kill. She's got shoved right out there, rolls down the hill, and they find her in the stream the next day. There's the Demarest Kill. At times when we were growing up, we used to wade that every single day, and after big heavy rainstorms, it was really a strong current and lots of fun. When I was there this day, it was very, very dry. But I could still hear the sound of the Demarest Kill. I don't even have to remember it. It's there. That sound of the water rushing over the rocks is still in my brain. And it's like I say, I'm like that guy, those people on the Hoarder show. I can't get rid of it. What do I do with these things? I can't get rid of these things. Right, so there you see a couple of things that are in this montage here. You see the old Irion house, which in Demarest Kill I renamed as the Florian house. You see the keyboard because that plays a central role in this story. You see the Steinway piano there. You see the brick house there where Beth is murdered. You see the OBW cemetery, which is at the top of the hill there, just behind the Irion house. How many of you know where that is? Okay. Yeah. So this is kind of a loss of innocence, coming of age story. And again, it took me a long time to write this. I started writing it in 2001 on Karen and Jim's back deck They have a beautiful back deck with nice shade trees. And I sat there and I wrote like the first 100 pages over the course of the several days. And then I had to stop because of 9/11. And I put it down for 9/11 and didn't pick it up again for almost 10 years. So it didn't get finished for quite a while. But it started on Jim and Karen's back porch. And there's my son there at the OBW cemetery. We're not sure, but we think the OBW cemetery was someone who might have been in the jail and died of, was it yellow fever in 1918 or something like that? Something like that. We're not sure. Spanish flu, that's what it was. We're not sure, but we think that's who that OBW is. As kids, when we saw OBW on the gravestone, we always used to say Old Bird Watcher. That was our nickname for the tombstone. Okay. So, one of my favorite poets, Wordsworth, the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions recollected in moments of tranquility. He's talking about poetry specifically here, but I use that as kind of a motto for myself. We have all these beautiful memories that we keep in our hearts, in our heads, in our minds, in our brains, and then when it's peaceful and quiet, we sit down and recollect these moments. There, also during this time in the late 50s, bike riding was really big, really big. Starting from the far right is Brother Ray. Raise your hand, Brother Ray. Next to him was our close friend Bobby Dosher, the late Bobby Dosher, who was a brilliant kid who left us far too soon. That's me right there, second from the left. George Owen, some of you remember George Owen. All of us in the neighborhood got bicycles on our 6th grade Christmas. We all got bicycles. All the Damiani kids, you got a bicycle? We got bicycles. Everyone got a bicycle for that 6th grade Christmas. And we all spent hours riding around town on our bicycles. In 1960, another eventful thing happened to me. My grandmother called me over to her house. She lived next door. She said, Frank, I got this book from the New City Library, and you must read this book. You have to read this book. Now remember, this is a woman who read 7 novels a week. She didn't skim them, she read them. 7 novels a week. She says, you have to read this book. She hands me this book. I read it. And at that point, I made another commitment. I was going to do for New City what Harper Lee had done for Monroeville, Alabama. I'm still trying to do that, but it's a worthy goal. Small town life, worthy of telling a story, a beautiful story. And my grandmother said, you have got to read this book. I did, and it, like the other things, the other events we talked about, it changed my life. All right, let's move on to high school. I got to say, we had the greatest education system you could ever ask for, going to New City schools and Clarkstown schools. I'm not exaggerating. Some of us didn't realize it at the time. I'm sure a lot of us did not appreciate it at the time, but we had the best, the very, very best, because our parents were committed to providing us with a great education, and they did. Home to the most inspiring teachers ever. I'm going to introduce you to one of those in just a second, if you don't mind, Coach. All right. Here's an irony. 10th grade, required reading. The Scarlet Letter, Moby Dick, The Red Badge of Courage, The Bridge of San Luis Rey. While all of my other classmates were reading these required readings, I was reading From Here to Eternity by James Jones, Something of Value by Robert Roark, Norman Mailer books, all the bestsellers on the New York Times bestseller list. I didn't want to read these because they were old-fashioned. I wanted to read the current stuff. So I'm sitting in class going through From Here to Eternity, and all the other kids are sitting there reading the Scarlet Letter. It's a good thing and a bad thing. The irony is, when I became a school teacher myself, we used the exact same book to teach 10th graders. Something else happened in my life. In 1963, a guy by the name of Larry McMurtry, who wrote a lot of Texas novels, had written a book called Horsemen Pass By, which was made into the movie HUD, Paul Newman. I walked outside my house, I stuck my thumb out, I hitchhiked to the brand new Hillcrest Cinema 45, and in 3 rides I was there. And I saw Paul Newman in HUD, and again, it was a life-changing event. Why? Because Larry McMurtry had taken this small town and turned it into something memorable. You could tell he was obsessed by his love of small Texas towns. And when I saw that movie, I'm not exaggerating, it changed my life. Again, just like the photo walk with my father, just like To Kill a Mockingbird, just like all these other things, just like the music I sat listening to my sister play all day long. It changed my life. 60 years ago was a life-changing experience, and I could write 50 books. I'm not exaggerating. I could write 50 books about our senior year in high school. Some of my classmates are here. Jim, Richard, Nancy, Ellen, Lewis. Most of you. We got Jim. Jimmy. Oh, Jimmy. I'm looking around. Not Linda. Raise your hands. Class of 64. Raise your hand.
We were happy to
We had the best. We had the best. Never before, never since. We had the best. And it was life-changing for me. It was life-changing for me. For the first time in Clarkstown High School history, we won the championship football. Okay? Look at this, Bobby Lawson. There's me over there with my arms spread out like that. This is my buddy Charlie Pate. Pat Damiani, late Pat Damiani. Another friend who has left us too soon, Paul Hanchar. That's me. There's a father. My father took that picture in the last minute of the NIAC game as we were winning our 9th game, it was the 8th game in a row. Recognize anyone in that picture? Norman, do you recognize anyone in that picture? Phyllis. And again, the late Pat. There's Responti and there's Ellen. Ellen, you recognize that picture? What friends we had. Jim Damiani, Vinnie Burns, what great people. Charlie, there's our kindergarten class, Methodist Church on Maple Avenue. How many kindergarten kids do you know that could walk out during recess and start petting and feeding goats and sheep? That's the environment we grew up in. There's me in the front row, second from the right, Charlie Pate, the tall guy back in front of the window there. We are still friends, 72 years later. We're on the phone. We talk to each other twice a month on the phone. There we are, playing cops in The Man Who Came to Dinner, our senior year. And there we are in 2002. 8 of us. Look, there's Vinny. There's the late Ken Connors, Richard Leibowitz. That's me in the middle. There's Jimmy in the green shirt, Charlie standing up, Ken Barkin, Simon Levinson. Still together 40 years after high school. Why? Because we meant so much to each other. And there we are at our 50th reunion. There's the cast of The Man Who Came to Dinner. 50 years later, that's me in the foreground taking a picture of everybody. There's Jimmy on the left in the purple shirt. Okay, 35 years after that, the NIAC Journal asked me to write an article about it. And so let me just read you a little of that. In November 1963, we were unstoppable, champions on the football field and ready to conquer the world. What a difference a month would make. When the 63-64 senior year began in a splash of brilliant autumn color, we knew we had all the answers. Within 2 semesters, we were to discover how little we knew about ourselves, our friends, and the world around us. We lived in an Ozzie and Harriet meets Norman Rockwell painting with our rosy cheeks and short haircuts. We were studying hard and hoping to pass, in the words of Chuck Berry, dancing to Chuck Berry Motown, and enamored, even hypnotized by a smiling president and his wife we saw on black and white television. Clarktown High School is a different world than the one we live in now. There were no drugs, no racial turmoil, no malicious acts of rebellion or student violence, no teacher assaults, no all-pervasive sense of fear so prevalent in many of our nation's schools today. That fall of '63, we looked ahead to a year of promise, and a future that held no limits. It's a longer article, but it's posted online on our Clarkstown thing. I will take the time to read it because we're running out of time. But that year in our high school class, again, changed my life and my feelings about New City and where we had grown up. We lost Kennedy. At the end of the year, we dedicated our yearbook to Coach Joe DiVincenzo, who happens to be here with us tonight. I cannot tell you the influence teachers like Coach Joe DiVincenzo and his colleagues had on us. We are here tonight because of their dedication and their commitment to us. So we can never, ever thank them enough. And I'm serious about that. Sometimes you don't get it right away, and it takes a while. But that's what Coach did for us, and our love of learning, our intellectual curiosity. That summer, after I graduated, I became a lifeguard at New City Park, one of the most beautiful spots on earth. And you're looking at that picture on the right and you're saying to yourself, Frank, why do you have membership badges to a lake from 62 years ago? Are you a hoarder? And the answer is, I'm a memory hoarder. I'm sorry. That's my lifeguard whistle for the 2 summers I was a lifeguard there. I'm a hoarder. I'm not apologizing. I don't know who said this or where I got this quote, but I love it. By the time a person reaches 18, they have enough stories inside their head and heart and soul to last a lifetime of writing. That's very true. That's Ray and me and Ricky, our pup, on the front porch of our house that my grandfather built. That's our father and the 2 of us in our front yard. By the time you're 18, you have enough stories to tell. Here's a Memorial Day parade. Where's our fireman? Roth, Mr. Roth?
Yeah, Ross.
Ross. I told you 1962. Who's that in the front? It's Rona Steckler. This is taken right outside our house in New City. Okay? When walking past every Memorial Day. There's me in the backyard of my 16th birthday. I climbed every one of those trees. I spent hours in every one of those trees in our backyard. And those trees have meaning for me. I embraced them and they embraced me. Here's where the bad news begins. My parents moved to Florida. I went to University of Florida the first year, my freshman year. I was walking around campus on Gainesville, but I was not in Gainesville. I could not leave New City. I could not. And it became so bad that I couldn't focus. I was so homesick, it almost became like a mental illness because I missed my friends, my hometown so much. So yes, I went to University of Florida, a semester and a half, before I had to drop out because I just wanted to go back to New City. I couldn't get it out of my head and my heart. I had to go back to New City. I eventually went to Palm Beach Junior College with Brother Ray. There we are from '67. He's the one on the right. I got a job working on the Beachcomber, which was a school paper, because I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to be a writer. I had a wonderful Shakespeare teacher by the name of Watson B. Duncan III. He taught us all about English Lit, and all of a sudden, even though we had learned English Lit in high school, this put a whole new perspective on it. He was a brilliant, scholarly Shakespeare teacher who shaped my life. He also had two former students 10 years before I got there. Guy on the right, Monty Markham. You may know Monty Markham. And the guy on the left, what's his name again? Burt Reynolds. He discovered both of those guys. He introduced me to Burt Reynolds because he wanted me to interview him for the school paper when Burt Reynolds came to the school to speak, to inspire some students. And when Duncan died, they asked me to do a documentary. There's a documentary crew, but that's about 1990, I think. And there we are shooting a stand-up with Monty Markham there for the tribute documentary we did for Watson v. Duncan III. I eventually went to Florida Atlantic University and graduated and worked on my master's degree at Florida State. And I realized when working on my master's degree, I thought, I don't want to be a reader. I want to be a writer. So I never finished my master's degree. I taught at Palm Beach Gardens High School for 4 years. I was there like 16 hours every single day because after school I was in charge of the speech and drama program. We did all kinds of plays. Why? I wanted to convey my love of storytelling and my love of what I had learned doing The Man Who Came to Dinner to my students. So over the course of time, we did West Side Story, we did The Pajama Game, we did Little Abner, we did Up the Down Staircase. This was during the turmoil of school desegregation. I wanted to make the kids who were being bused to our school feel welcome. So we did A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry to give these new kids a chance to realize that they were welcome in our school. I was also part of the cinema arts program. I was the cinema teacher. And let me go back for a minute, because one of the things I want to tell you is in 1962, my sister Bonnie and Ray and I made a film. And when we showed it to people, they laughed hysterically. I thought, wow, that's wonderful. And then 2 years later, Tor Heskestad, raise your hand. This is all your fault, you know.
Guilty.
Tor and Ray and I went to Florida with my mother for summer vacation. Tor brought his 8mm camera, and we made some comedies starring Tor. And when he showed those to our church youth group and to other people, they laughed so hard they couldn't stop laughing. They were hysterically funny. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, maybe instead of storytelling through writing, I could tell stories through films, and I have someone to blame it on. So I started thinking maybe I should tell stories through films, not just through writing. So that's what I started doing. Although I did write some novels while I was a teacher. One was called The War at Home. It's about a guy who leaves New City to go to college. He comes back to teach at Clarkstown High School, and he gets drafted to go to Vietnam, and he leaves New City behind. I never finished that novel. It's about 200 pages long, but it's about New City, about Vietnam. Fourth and Goal, a New City protagonist, a child piano prodigy. Does that sound familiar? My sister and Demorest Kill. He discovers his older brother, who is a championship football player on the championship team. Does that sound familiar? Is guilty of horrendous crimes. So what does he do about it? Again, I never finished that one. But I was still trying to write New City stories. One of the things that happened in the last year I was there, with the Cinema Arts Club there, we were shooting 16mm film there. This is all your fault. I made a film with two of my students. My students made like 80 films a year. And one of the films that I made with two of my students was a short film called Sundays Will Never Be the Same. And it's about a young man and woman who are in love, and he gets drafted and goes to Vietnam and never comes home. And the students and the faculty wanted to see what we had been doing. So we had a room about this size. There were about 50 students in it, about maybe 10 faculty members, and the school principal was there because he wanted to see what we were doing. And so we showed this film, lasted about 12 minutes, and when it was over, I walked over here to turn on the lights. I turned around, and every single person in the room was crying. Every single one, including the principal. And I thought to myself, maybe I should consider telling stories through film, not just through prose. This is all your fault. So I started shifting gears a little bit. Maybe there's some new city stories I can tell on film, not just in writing. Then a weird thing happened. My last year of school there, the students dedicated the yearbook to me. Two things crossed my mind immediately. One, this honor does not belong to me. This honor belongs to Joe DiNocenzo. Why? Because Coach DiNocenzo and his colleagues led the way. They taught us how to be good teachers. Every single day I got up to teach, I was mimicking what Coach DiNocenzo and our teachers had taught us how to be a good teacher. So the first thing that came to my mind, this belongs to Coach D, it does not belong to me. The second thing that came to mind was, I need to find a new hairstylist. All right, so the plan was I was going to leave teaching, go to graduate school, write novels while I was at the University of Florida going to graduate school. But instead, I got sidetracked. I went to Memphis to visit my friend Benny Burns, who was going to school there, getting his master's degree. And by some sheer crazy coincidence, we got introduced to a rock and roll icon by the name of Steve Cropper. Steve Cropper was a producer at Stax. He was in Booker T and the MGs. He was one of the Blues Brothers. He's the tall guy that plays the lead guitar. He was producing Lynn and Sam. And Vinny and I got hired to do 3 music videos for them. And again, it changed my life. It took me away from writing and pushed me in the direction of filmmaking. From that, I came back to West Palm Beach. I got a job in TV news for 8 years or so. I was sent all over the state of Florida and did all kinds of crazy things. I was the first guy ever to shoot news film at Mar-a-Lago in 1974 when it was owned by the government. Marjorie Merriweather Post had it, or she and her husband built it, and when she died, she willed it over to the United States government. The government had it for a couple of years. They couldn't maintain the maintenance on it, so they decided to sell it back to the public. If you go onto the Wolfson Archives of Miami, you can see the footage I shot that day when they allowed me to go shoot that. So I was at TV news for about 8 years, going out shooting 2 or 3 stories a day. One day when I was in news, I picked up a wire copy store, and it said 16 organized crime families from the New York metropolitan area had moved into Palm Beach County and were setting up operations in Palm Beach County. So I ran over to the news director and I said, look at this story, we got to cover this. And he looked at me and said, we are never going to cover that story. So in 5 seconds, this entire novel mapped itself out in my brain. And from that 5-second conversation, I was able to write that novel. It's about a guy who comes down to Florida from the city, from New York, gets a job at a TV station in Florida, and gets involved in investigating organized crime in Palm Beach County. So it's partially based on a true story. In the dedication to this book, I dedicate it to the guys in the Jerry Todd series that my father had read to me. Jerry, Red, Peg, Scoop, and Poppy. And to the town of Tutter, Illinois, where my father, Brother Ray, and I spent many of our childhood days. It was a disguised love letter to my father. No one knows what this means except Ray, my sister, and my father. And they knew immediately what I was doing. I was saying thank you to my father for getting me involved in lifelong reading. From there, I did PM Magazine for a couple of years in West Palm Beach. We did all kinds of crazy stuff. Hanging around yachts and water and beaches. Who wants to do that? Everglades. There's Jerry Lewis. I worked on Jerry Lewis's film. The worst film Jerry Lewis ever made was shot in Palm Beach County. And we followed him for weeks while he was shooting it. Don't waste your time on hardly working. It's terrible. From there, I did PM Magazine in Miami for a couple of years. And during that time when I was working for PM Magazine in Miami, we were able to interview John D. McDonald. He's a famous mystery writer who, in the last years of his life, lived in Florida, and he is the author of Travis McGee's stories. There are about 21 mystery novels. Some of you may know that. And this was another day that changed my life as a wannabe writer. Why? Because during the course of my researching him, I found out that when he got out of the Army after the war, he sat down and wrote the equivalent of 10 novels in 3 months. Do the math. That's a novel every 12 days, 10 times in a row without coming out for air. I thought to myself, I'm going to try that. I wrote a novel during that period of time it was called Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues, but because of music licensing and all that stuff, I had to change the name to Sweet City Blues. It's a story that takes place, it's very much like HUD, the guy in the pink Cadillac driving around the small Texas town. See the pink Cadillac? Sweet City Blues. I wrote that. And then I sat down and wrote the first 60 pages of that in 24 hours, trying to emulate John D. McDonald writing 10 novels in 3 months. Someone has called this Jeffrey Epstein in Palm Beach, 1980. Because there are some similar themes. And I wrote this around 1982, and then all that stuff that was going on in Palm Beach in the last couple of years, I put it out. It's like, did they read my book? Is that where they got the idea to do that stuff? I don't know. Now we get into the part of the program I talk about excuses why I have not written more books. As a freelancer, you have to take jobs. When they come along, you can hardly ever say no. I did a lot of projects. I did over 100 projects for the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service. If you were in the military, you know about all that. They send us all over the world doing tribute videos and documentaries about different battles. Like we covered the Pearl Harbor battle. We're on the battleship, overlooking the battleship Arizona there. They sent us to Midway Islands to attribute that. That's Omaha Beach. So I got sent all over the world doing stuff all the time. And can you sit down and write a novel while you're doing that? I tried, but I wasn't very successful. I did a lot of entertainment shows. There's Alice Cooper, there's the Bee Gees. We did for Entertainment Tonight, and the jobs were coming in like crazy at that time in Florida. And when you're a freelancer, you can't say no. You have to take the jobs. And so it kept me from writing what was really in my heart all those years, West in the City. There's B.B. King, got to spend some time with him. I did all kinds of industrial films. Did a lot of racetrack stuff. I did a TV pilot for Gloria Estefan and Chris Evert. Don't ask me about that. There we are doing the Duncan thing. I used to do a lot of helicopter work back when you had to have a helicopter, not a drone. I would have my barf bag in this hand and the camera trigger in this hand, and I would shoot a little bit and then throw it, and then shoot a little bit and then throw it. Okay. I got to race through this real fast. So I did all kinds of stuff. That's Roger McGuinn from the Byrds. We were always doing music stuff. He lives in Orlando. There's just some other pictures. There's Bill Pinkney from the Drifters. I grew up idolizing the Drifters, and I got to interview and spend the day with one of the original Drifters at his home in South Carolina, and we shot him in concert too. I did a little TV pilot for a group of kids down in the Boca Raton area. One of them grew up to be Ariana Grande. There's Dolly Parton. Someone said, Frank, how long were you with Dolly Parton? The answer is 1/60th of a second, which is the time it takes a flashbulb to go off. Next. And then I spent 2 years in Hollywood trying to get a film or two off the ground. If I never go to Hollywood again or ever hear that word again, I don't care. I wouldn't spend another 10 seconds there. I did get to work on a Sam Waterston film that was made in France. What they did, all three lead actors spoke English and French, so they would do a French take, and then they would do an English take. And they gave me the English version to take to New York and to Los Angeles to edit. So I got to work with them. But do I ever want to work in Hollywood again? No, thank you. I did write a screenplay in 8 days, though, called Snowbirds, which I later adapted into another novel that's available of mine. I got to spend a lot of time with working with Burt Reynolds because I had known him and worked with him in the past. I spent about 12 years team teaching with him. He owned a place in Jupiter called Burt Reynolds Institute for Film and Theater, and we did a lot of work together, team teaching and working with actors. He was actually in a film that I wrote and directed for kids called Turtles. He wanted to do it because he wanted to support the actors in his class. Why am I telling you this? Because when you're doing this kind of stuff, you can't stop and write. One of the kids in Turtles was a 13-year-old unknown kid from Boca Raton who grew up to be, some of you know this guy, Noah Centineo. He's a big superstar now. He's done half dozen Disney films, and he's got a series on TV. But I worked with him in 2009. Now he's a big shot. Never returns my calls. And again, I may have been in Hollywood, but my heart was in New City, playing in the snow, playing in the woods, upstairs in the barn where the mail wagon was that Ray and I are working at. Okay, so I took my son here. There's Demarest Killian. Gloria Summer of Our Content, New City Park. That's the one I'm working on now. That's about a Norwegian family. I'm going to put that in there again. I started reading Demarest Killed on Jim and Karen's back porch, summer 2001. I think I told you that story already. There's the Dells. Some of you may remember that building before it was vandalized. Lotor. I'm also working, or if you look at this one here, Jimmy Van Meter's Last Refrain. That is inspired by two people. I've worked with Doc Carney, one of the greatest teachers ever to go to Clarkstown, one of the most influential teachers in Clarkstown's history. He impacted the lives of so many people in so many great ways. He was just a work of nature. I don't even know how to explain him. And another guy I worked with, I can't remember his name. Oh, yes, Jimmy Butler. Believe it or not, those two guys inspired me to write Jimmy Van Meter's Last Refrain. It's about a guy from New City, moves down to Florida, gets part of the Florida music industry back in the 70s, and then some weird things happen to him, and he's convinced to do a murder, or commit a murder. So that's my son posing as Jimmy Van Meter up on the Tomoka River. And again, on the back picture, I use the B.B. King picture. Again, it's not a whodunit, it's a why done it. And then there's Vinny and the New City Band, or the Clarkstown Band under Doc Carney's. Okay, we don't have time to read that, unfortunately. I do want to read this, though, from Jimmy Van Meter's Last Refrain, because this, whoops, what did I do? While Ray was fixing that, I'm going to read to you from Jimmy Van Meter's Last Refrain. Whoops. We're almost done anyway. Growing up in New City, I fell in love with trees. I especially fell in love with maple trees. And Jimmy Van Meter, excuse me, when Jimmy Van Meter reflects on his childhood in New City, it's always about the trees. If anyone wants to find me, this is where I'll be. Home in my backyard on Maple Avenue, New City, in the branches of an old sugar maple tree. Do branches and leaves have answers? I'll let you be the judge. All I know is when I'm in their embrace, I never want to budge. I spend my boyhood giving them big bear hugs, my face against rough bark. I extended my hand to them to lift me, to protect me from the dark. They never let me down, not once. My spirit soared the higher I climbed, and when I got to the top, peered out, I knew the future was mine. But now the future is over and done, and it's time to go back home. I'll shimmy up the tree trunks and climb up to the dome. The branches bend beneath my weight. They lend a helping hand. It's all familiar territory, considered sacred land. From on that height, I'll sit, reflect on days gone by, life's memories, the good, the bad, the happy, the sad, days of hardship, days of ease. And as I sit, reflect the years in wonder and amazement, I'll relive the times and count the tears. Realize it all started up here. The world beneath branches, just feet off the ground, opened my eyes, opened my ears, filled my head with sights and sound. And although that boy climbed down to earth, those days in the trees had given him birth, as surely as his mom and dad pointed down the road and made him glad. Like training wheels, they kept him balanced, pushed him off, let him go. He wobbled once, wobbled twice, armed with the best there is to know. It's because he loved the trees of New City. That's the street I used to walk to every day to go to school, starting at age 5. Can you imagine letting a kid walk to school on their own at age 5 nowadays? So, I have a lot more, but we're out of time. I do want to say a couple things. Well, this is the one I'm working on next, that glorious Summer of Our Content. It's about a Norwegian family living in New City Park, settling New City Park. Let me just read you just 1 or 2 lines. With apologies to, by the way, Charles Dickens, Herman Melville, and John Steinbeck. Call me Ivor, or call me by my friend's nickname for me, Ivy. It was the best of times. It was the best of times. It was the age of happiness and discovery. It was the age of innocence and naivete and excitement. It was the epoch of optimism. It was the age of belief in the future. It was the season of brightness. It was the season of open horizons. It was the spring of smiles. It was the summer of hope. It was the age of belief, the age of foolishness. We had everything before us. We were all going to heaven. It was that glorious summer of our content. In the summer of '63, I was well with the world. I was living in a perfect place in time, in the embrace of a perfect home and extended family, a life filled with love and music and laughter and wisdom. It was all so tangible. I could reach out and touch it and cradle it in my hands while it shaped me. Why didn't I take the time to listen, to notice, to observe, to pay attention? Why didn't I pay attention? Looking back from today's perspective, it is often difficult to imagine that such a family and such a place existed. Please tell me it wasn't a dream. Never mind, I know it wasn't a dream. It would be a few years more before we tripped the like fandango, turned cartwheels across the floor. But if I had been paying attention, would I have noticed that change was in the air? So this is all about what happens prior to that fateful year of '63, '64. So that's the doing, that glorious Summer of Our Content. I was hoping to be finished with it now, but I've had a couple of big freelance jobs dumped in my lap, and like I say, when you're freelancers, you can't say no. In conclusion, before we open it up to Q&A, I hate to be name dropping all the time, but it's part of the story, I'm sorry. I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of celebrities and sports stars and musicians and athletes, and I've interviewed 4 presidents of the United States. And at one point in time, I sat down and I said, what do all these people have in common? They come from such different backgrounds. What do they have in common? And I could only come up with one answer. And the answer was this. None of them were willing or able to recognize the influence they had on other people. They simply could not recognize it. John D. MacDonald sold 90 million books. The reason I bring this up is I want you to think about this. We have all had good lives, thanks to people like Coach D. What can we do to pass that on to the next generation? And the answer is, if you have children or grandchildren or know people, bring them to the library and get them in the habit of reading. To me, it's one of the best things you can do for them. So I am urging you and encouraging you to please spread your influence and get these kids to come to the library. So anyway, in conclusion, you give Joe a $25 contribution for the library, you get a free book for the first 6 people. Don't go rushing off. Check, cash, money order, what do you want?
Take it back if you got it.